The only thing I want to say by way of introduction is that I'm genuinely excited that both the board and the council have endorsed the thought that ADI should pursue a rights approach at the international level. Very excited about that. I hope we can put on the ADI website very soon the paper which the board and the council looked at, which Peter, Kate and a consultant helped put together. I hope we can do that. And if Kate's fee isn't too high, I hope we can buy the video of Peter's presentation.
It'll cost you.
I know, I thought it might. I hope we can put the video of... Shush! I know you're co-chair, but shush! I hope we can put the video of Peter's wonderful presentation this morning on our website, because I'd like the world to share it if the price isn't too high. So, having said that, Kate, who's co-chairing this session with me, is also the first speaker, so I'll hand over to you, Kate.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm feeling a bit more, and I'm having a bit more trouble with words, feeling a bit more rebellious because it's late in the day and I'm really tired. Maybe, can't remember what the next slide is. So I'm going to talk about the human rights for people with dementia, and I've been banging on about this for a number of years, since the University of South Australia treated the symptoms of my dementia as simply disabilities to be supported so that I could keep living my life and continue studying. But I'll just start with Dementia Alliance International, of which I'm a co-founder, and Peter is our human rights advisor. He's been a member for about 12 months, I think. So we're a global advocacy and support group that's of, by, and importantly, for people with dementia. But more importantly, it's by people with dementia. So we don't have anybody without dementia running our group. The whole board are people with dementia. And we advocate for a global voice and for the needs of people with dementia. In collaboration with Alzheimer's Disease International, Dementia Alliance International is now the peak body for people with dementia and the global voice of people with dementia, with a fairly rapidly growing membership at the moment in, I think John said 10 countries yesterday. I think we're actually up to 13 countries with 8 support groups in 3 different time zones. So our global charter is living beyond dementia, not only dying from it. Our vision is a world where a person with dementia continues to be fully valued and included. That's just a little bit about dementia. Just go historically, when I started talking about people with dementia being people with disabilities, there was quite a bit of push back from people with dementia about the notion of being labelled with something again. Like, we're already being labelled with dementia. You're not going to label me as a disabled person now, surely. When we start talking about the rights that people with dementia have, their ears started opening up a little bit. So I have been advocating literally for years. Lots of people, organisations, individuals have always agreed with me in principle. And I'm not talking about the people with dementia who said, I don't want another label. I'm talking about advocacy organisations, health sector, and so on. Yes, it's a great idea, but never any action on it. I was invited to speak at the WHO First Ministerial Conference on Dementia last year and changed my speech at 2 o'clock in the morning, the day off, and added our human rights and access to the UN CRPD in that speech. So that was really the beginning of what I think is going to be great change for people with dementia around the world. And Raymond, you talked about human rights for people with dementia yesterday, and Peter very eloquently this morning, standing ovation. So I feel a bit second rate after listening to you this morning, Peter. So DAR's 3 key demands at the WHO First Ministerial Conference were that we have a human right to a more ethical pathway of care, including pre- and post-diagnostic care, and on pre- and post-vention, including rehabilitation. These were exactly as I had them on the slides in Geneva. We have a human right to being treated with the same the same human rights as everyone else under the Disability Discrimination Acts and the UN CRPD, and that research does not only focus on a cure but also on care. So on day one of this conference, they announced the new global figures, which were over 37 million people, and the new global rate of one new diagnosis every 3.2 seconds, and then spent the whole day talking about research for cure. So I was a bit annoyed with that and decided to put that on the agenda the next day. So the need for a human rights-based approach, maybe I'll just let you read that, or shall I read it out? But it's widely recognised that people living with dementia are frequently denied their human rights, both in the community and in care homes. In many countries, people living with dementia are often physically and chemically restrained, even when regulations are in place to uphold those rights. Furthermore, people living with dementia can also be victims of abuse. So I've seen that firsthand when my father-in-law was in residential aged care, and in Australia, legislation says that if he's going to be medicated with anything, they're supposed to contact the family. And I turned up one day and Dad was almost out cold in the room, and I said to them, "What's wrong with Dad? Has he had a stroke?" "Oh no, he was misbehaving in the, challenging behaviour this morning in the activities room." And I said, "Well, what were you doing? What was he doing there?" "Oh, well, he wasn't playing bingo." And yet on the sheet, when we admitted him, we said he didn't like bingo. So instead of finding him another activity, they drugged him to the point where he was almost comatose. They did not contact us to get permission to do that. Now that's quite a few years ago, but I hear stories like that almost every other day from people who have loved family members living in residential homes. There's all sorts of forms of abuse happening to people with dementia, both in the community and in residential care and in the acute sector. That is a human rights issue. So we need a rights-based approach. This is, have I gone on the next slide? No. So the Convention defines that persons with disabilities, as including persons with disabilities, include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments wherein interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So there can be little doubt that people with dementia fit into this category. And I guess from my perspective, it's disappointing that this hasn't come up many, many, many years ago, and that it took an advocacy support group of, by and for people with dementia to actually get it on the stage properly, where there's action happening, not just talk. So in simple terms, we are simply told at diagnosis to go home and die. Might not be those words, but that's basically what we're told to do, and there's nothing they can do. We are not provided with rehabilitation or other enabling post-diagnostic support like we would have been if we'd had a stroke, a recoverable stroke, or a road accident with a brain injury. We're not provided with the same disability support as every other person with a disability, and that definitely was my experience, because some of you did hear me speak yesterday. I was at university when I was diagnosed, and the health sector told me to go home, get my end-of-life affairs in order and get acquainted with aged care, aged 49. And the university sector said, well, that would be stupid. Why don't you go to the disability support services and we can support you with strategies to keep studying and keep fulfilling your dreams. So the universities have got it down pat. We need the health sector to catch up. But also it's often been and often still is about us without us, and that's also a human rights issue. So last year we had the great luck to have, sometimes it was lucky finding somebody else with dementia who's got a particular talent, and Professor Peter Mittler, his academic and professional background has been very heavily focused on the human rights in the disability sector. And then as a person with mild Alzheimer's disease, he too realised that people with dementia are missing out on the tool that is the CRPD that we can use. So he, following my talk in Geneva, he's he and I have been advocating with ADI, and as Glenn announced, we have agreement from all of the ADI council members to move this forward with more action. So that actually means a lot of work for countries. It's not all up to ADI, it's not all up to DAI. I don't even get an invitation to attend most of the things at WHO or the United Nations. So people that do get those invitations need to be advocating for us. So it's very good news this week. It's very exciting. So this is from a document that Glenn referred to that's going to go up on the website as well, written by Neil Crowther, who's an expert in this sector, and with a lot of assistance from Peter and guidance and reviewing from myself and the ADI team. But it's now been agreed that ADI and DAI will work together on recommended steps internationally. At the national level, you can consider using this as a tool as well. We hope that Canada will be the first country that is going to be discussed at the UN in August 2016, and hope it's agreed to be a pilot that others can learn from. The recommendations in the first small report that was written, commissioned to be written, engaging with the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, including through its policy-making processes, seeking to develop productive relationships with the global network of national human rights institutions, preparing and disseminating widely a paper on the UN CRPD and the rights of persons with dementia, and encouraging supporting national and regional Alzheimer's organisations to participate in the examinations by the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities of their own states. And Peter's going to go into more detail on all of this. So thank you from Dementia Alliance International, and I hope that we have started not just a global conversation, not just a little bit of change this week or last year, but a lot of change moving forward for the rights of people with dementia in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, as always. I should say, of course, that the work's only just started in a way. We're looking forward to taking part in a side event, possibly in September. And the job for Peter and Kate, myself, and hopefully others, will be to draw together a brief that we can use internationally as ADI, as well as for member states with their national governments. I should say that our next speaker, Professor Peter Mittler, his first words to me, I think almost his first words to me, at least I can remember these words, Peter, so you can't contradict me. His first words he said to me were, Glenn, this is going to be too much for me. I really can't do all this work, but I'm happy to help. Well, he's conducted himself in exactly the equal and opposite way. I get emails maybe every day, maybe twice every day. From people, yeah, I know. Giving me advice, copying me in on useful correspondence and papers, and without that we wouldn't be where we are. So it's not just the talk this morning that was great, it's been Peter's effort through the last 9-12 months. So Peter, please come and talk to us.
Well, thanks very much for those words. I'd like to say at the beginning that it's been fantastic the last year. It's been a whirligig year. It's had its ups and downs, but we really made fantastic progress. Sometimes we thought we weren't getting anywhere. We had obstacles, attitudinal obstacles. It's just, as I said, it's two different worlds. But when we look back, we really have made fantastic progress. And I'd like to say, saving Kate's blushes, because we know how easily she blushes, it's been fantastic working with her. We make a very good team. When we disagree about something, we can speak to each other and then just get on the next day. We've never had a fundamental disagreement. but I'm in England and she's in Adelaide, and there's a time difference of 8.5 hours, and it actually is really rather difficult to find time to talk. But despite these sort of obstacles, to have got as far as we have in a year is fantastic. I watched the webcast when Kate was up there with the great and the good of the WHO, when I didn't know she was going to put access to the CRPD on her PowerPoints. I thought she might, but she said she'd have to discuss it with the board, because after all, boards have to agree to something like this, and they did. And so my wife will confirm that I went, yes, when I saw the webcast and it was there. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but I couldn't be sure that it would happen. So ever since then, it's been a roller coaster, hasn't it? I mean, that's one way to describe it. Now, I'm going to be as brief as I can be, and I apologise that some of the slides you're going to see, how many of you were there this morning for the health session? That really is most of you. So you're going to see some of those slides again, but I will tackle them from a slightly different perspective. And since most of you were there, there are certain things I really don't need to say again. But I do want to say a little bit about my background, because I've spent my whole life really working with people with intellectual disabilities, and I've watched the self-advocacy movement grow. I saw how they collaborated with the other disability groups, despite profound disagreements amongst some of them. For example, they disagree on sheltered workshops. They disagree on inclusive education. That's been one of the most difficult ones. The most difficult articles of the convention are about legal capacity, where those working for a convention for older persons, which has not yet been agreed, are going along different lines from the UN Convention on legal capacity, which is something that concerns us very, very much, and also on the independent living, that the older persons working party that is working on this takes a less radical line, that people need to be enabled to live at home for as long as they're supported to do so. And that's the thing, how do we support people to do so? So the weakest point, really, at the moment, and there is general agreement about this, is what the medical profession calls post-diagnostic support, and that we call a rehabilitation pathway. So can I have the first slide? We've already had this because this overlapped, so let me move on. And this I will go through briefly because you've seen it, but I will just want to dwell. High quality care is the last thing we get at the moment. The OECD is evidence on that. We get the worst quality of care in the developed world, and that, I think, is grossly discriminatory. It's discriminatory against old people, it's discriminatory against all people with dementia, whatever they are. So that's a sort of systemic discrimination. And as I said this morning, the convention is about providing rights for people who've been neglected, marginalized, ignored in the Universal Declaration of Rights. And I named them this morning: women, ethnic minorities, many, many others. This again hardly happens, and this one is one of the most important because it is part of Article 19. I'll come back to that. And this is what people with dementia have said. So now we come on to what does it actually offer people living with dementia? That's the big challenge, and that's the question everybody's asking. Many people have said, but we don't really perceive ourselves as disabled. You don't have to. Our point is you can use the convention as a tool to get the rights that we deserve. It is a tool. You don't have to say, I'm disabled, therefore I have access to the convention. You've seen the definition that Kate just showed. There's no doubt among the experts, the lawyers, etc., that this convention applies to us. And I've just been to the UN this week, and they're really pleased that we have at last approached them. And we're going to do so again, we hope, at their next meeting when we put on a side event, which is the best way to make a case. But I had a very good reception, especially from the National Human Rights Institutions, the Older Persons Working Party, and so on. They've all said, welcome on board. Why weren't you here before, really? Which I couldn't say very much there. Right, so we don't need to go into this one again. Except that to say that the barriers we face are attitudinal barriers. It used to be, as I said, it used to be access to buildings, access to institutions. We have those barriers as well, but the biggest barrier that faces us is that everybody thinks that we are just a medical problem. And the feedback I had from my conversations with the people from WHO is, this is a decision for ministers. Well, it is a decision for ministers, but those ministers belong to governments that are legally committed to the convention. And I can't stress this point strongly enough. So that when some of you write independent reports, which I hope you will. Canada's probably going to be the first Alzheimer's Society to do so. It's just because it's their turn. You need to remember that the government have made a commitment in international law to implement this convention, article by article, and the number 19 about independent living is a priority for us. So those, we do have obstacles to face. And they are the people underestimate us. We get prescribed disengagement, in Kate's wonderful phrase. They write us off. They don't think we're capable of making decisions, and there are great generalizations. These are attitudinal obstacles, and we need to show that they're wrong. And this conference has shown that they're wrong. I just wish some of these medical decision makers are here. But we do have some very good doctors who are in support of us. I'm not saying anything anti-medical at all. We need our partners, we need medical research, because this is an illness, and a very, very promising research is going on. And some of the people I know in the disability movement criticize me for being too positive about the WHO, and a lot of nonsense is talked about the medical model. So we've moved on a lot about that. So this is not, it's how the system operates rather than any particular profession around. So these are, I think, the crucial questions for this workshop, which is intended to be the first of other workshops where people get training and support to use the convention. Any non-governmental organisation of or for people with dementia has a right in international law to approach the UN and at any point really, and we've already done it once, in order to say what things are like for people with dementia in their country. Because 17 of the 18 members of the CRPD committee are themselves people with a disability, it's not surprising that they very much welcome they very much welcome an approach which is at least joint, like the one we have between ADI and DAI, and that's really how it will go forward. So we have an immediate issue on this one, and we're unique about that, because dementia strategies are springing up all over the place. I've been to some sessions today about 3 or 4 more dementia strategies. They are very good strategies, and they say nice things about human rights. But the point is there needs to be accountability. I don't think I used that word this morning. The convention is about accountability to the people for whom a service is designed, and that's us. Nobody consults us. They may consult us at the beginning, but we're not involved in decision making, we don't have senior roles, and there is a lot of token consultation going on. And that's one of the things I learned from the disability movement. Beware of tokenism. You get invited to things, and I think it's very important that people with dementia should continue to tell their stories. I always say there'll be someone in the audience whose values will change, and who will go back to the workplace and think how they can change things. I work with MSc and dementia students, and this is what I say to them. They come in once a week, and I say, think what you can do to change the workplace to make it more human rights orientated. Next week, if possible. But the lobbying is when, now that dementia strategies are being launched in many, many countries, and there'll be many more, it's important to ensure that they don't just speak beautiful words about human rights, they use a convention which their governments have ratified. So the answer I had this morning, it's the responsibility of ministers, is that the ministers should know that their countries have ratified the convention. And the Australian government has been through the mill. It had some criticisms, but it also had a lot of praise, but basically it was told it wasn't going fast enough on disability. But nobody said, why aren't you including people with dementia? I think in the future, they will ask that. They may use words like cognitive impairment because they don't like using medical terminology. So that's a major task, lobbying to ensure that future dementia strategies reflect these principles, and then insisting on participating in the development of policy. In Japan took a long time to ratify the convention, and you know how advanced they are, because they persuaded the government that before it ratified the convention, they had to change the laws in Japan in order to make their laws compatible with the convention. They appointed a committee of disabled people. They paid them as civil servants, and the committee was co-chaired between them and the government minister, but they had a full say in how the law was to be changed. And then the question of parallel reports, we've already discussed that. You have that right now. And also, actually, I think the last one is the most important, because once the committee writes its concluding observations, that's in the press, and it needs to be followed up on. And the disability movement hasn't been very good on that. They haven't used it in order to put pressure on government, use the media to say, look, this has been reported. So it's a matter of holding governments to account. I made this point. This is a legal document. You're not going to be put in prison if you don't ratify it, but in a democratic society and in a democratic setup like this, everything is on the internet. So there is no excuse for people not knowing what has happened. So each country has to submit a detailed report, first after 2 years and then after 4, on what they've done. The government the government delegates are interviewed very, very rigorously. As I've said, 17 of the 18 members are themselves disabled, and any civil society can submit a report, and then it can be used. Now, I haven't got time to go through this again, but I'll just put it up quickly without reading it, because you've seen it before. These are the principles, and this is the crucial article on which I gave a paper at the UN meeting the other day. If anyone wants to see that, I think it is already on the DAO website. I think, Cable, it's about to be. It's quite a short paper.
It's Mr. Mayor, ask something of Article 19, or do you prefer to finish your talk first?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. Now, this is where I think we're going further than this. Kate's already referred to the notion of the diagnostic pathway. I won't go over it again, but the point about it is that it starts at the time that the diagnosis is just the departure point. The opportunity is given to come back and talk to the doctor or the diagnostic team, because people are in shock. We've read the books now by people with dementia. I say to the decision makers, you need to use these as evidence. We now have 3-4 books. You all know Kate's. Helga Rora's is now in proof form in English. It's being translated, and I strongly recommend you to read that. There's Richard Taylor's book, of course, and also Christine's yes. That's a little evidence. Now that's what it says. I'm going the wrong side. Rehabilitation. There's a lot more than that's needed, but that's a start. So we've already gone beyond that. And that quote was also used by John Sandlow yesterday, and it's very, very true. We are a small group. We're about 1,500 members, but the group of people who are activists in this have achieved a lot. We could achieve a lot more in collaboration with the Alzheimer's societies, other groups of people with dementia, through the internet, through blogging, through spreading the word, and it's a question of reclaiming the rights that are already ours in law, that other disability groups have got. I'm not saying it's all going brilliantly, but we are just not in the picture. And the submission I made to the committee it was the first from a dementia perspective. There have been submissions to a different committee for other reasons, but the point is that the CRPD committee is the official body that speaks for the UN. And there's going to be a meeting in June. We hope one of our people could go to that, which is actually the most important meeting of the year. It takes place in New York, when all the governments come and say all the wonderful things they're doing, but this time they're going to be asked some very searching questions, like I was asked. They've changed the procedure. So you're no longer allowed to read a script saying what your wonderful government is doing. You're given 2 short pages, you're not allowed to read it, and then the rapporteur asks you questions, and they are really searching questions. So I don't envy the government representatives who are going to be there. So good luck, everybody.